Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Covenant Cast. I'm Zach.
I'm Steven.
I'm Andrew.
And Andrew is our special guest today. He is the head of Fantasy Flight Games Studio, which means that you... Tell me about...
He's the boss.
What do you do? 2 seconds.
2 seconds. It's
One
already too late. I already ran out of time.
You run the show, right?
Sure.
You run the studio.
Yeah.
All right, and today we have him on so that we can talk about what's next for Tabletop. What's been up this week, Steven?
What's been up? So I took some vacation on Thursday and Friday.
No.
Of course, which you know.
I do know.
Andrew, maybe you had.
I didn't know
you
that.
didn't know that, but so this is a thing. I guess you call it a staycation if you're
Hip? As the kids
Lame?
say.
Yeah, I would go more on Andrew's.
No, I wouldn't say that the hip people are doing it. I would say that's what the hip people are calling
Would
it.
they call it a staycation? I feel like it's something like
If
my
you're like,
grandmother
I stayed
would
home
call
this
it.
weekend for extra time, they'd be like,
Yo,
oh, you got a staycation.
I got a staycation. Yeah, enjoy it. Yeah, that's what I did. And the reason that happened was because it's just really nice to take time off and not do anything with it, which I have not really done before, and I would highly suggest it.
It sounds incredible.
Anybody hasn't done that. But second, it was driven by this book that I got called the Magic of Tidying Up or something like that. I think, have you guys heard of that?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's...
Yeah, my good friend's reading it right now.
It's a Japanese lady who has spent essentially 30 years cleaning, organizing, tidying spaces, right? And so she has actual high-profile clients now and is really big into this. But approaches it in a very, as you'd expect, kind of philosophical way, where the act of getting rid of anything in your life that you don't love, that doesn't spark joy for you, should be disposed of, donated, whatever, so that everything in your house is creating joy for you and not being a burden, right? So that's what it was sparked from, and in the process of creating all this joy, you're also eliminating all the clutter from your room, which is synonymous with your mind, right? This is a very Eastern philosophy kind of thing. Yeah. And you'd be amazed, actually, if
you say you feel like super light?
Oh my, it's so light. So, when Shannon and I got married, and this is very personal, but it's fine. We had two entirely separate lives and things that were sufficient for each of us, and then
like couches and shower curtains.
Couches, shower curtains, pots, pans, cords, filing systems. I mean,
Ethernet
you name
cables.
It. Yeah, Ethernet.
You had
so many Ethernet. Can't even tell
you
you.
had 2 toothbrushes.
How many? Multiple toothbrushes.
Now only 1.
So it was this kind of thing where you had
Simplify it.
You got married, and then all of this stuff was together, and you didn't really have time to kind of sort through it all because then all this new marriage stuff is in front of you. So we took the chance to just have a nice, relaxing weekend. And the method is, we start with clothes. So you take all of the clothes in the house and you put them in the middle of the floor. Mm-hmm. And then you go one by one. You have to touch everything. So you have to hold it and say, basically, is this giving me joy, or has it served its purpose? And if it has, then you thank it. You say gratitude, thank you for what you've done for me, and now you're moving on to the next person. Or the
Fascinating.
So that's what we did. So there was 4 trash bags full of clothes that were donated to Goodwill out of that, and
nice.
then we got rid of a bunch of plastic storage from college. Those plastic things that you just acquire. Got rid of all that stuff.
And stuff.
Donated all of that, and even sold some clothes too.
Does it count to put it in a box and put it in the basement?
No, Andrew.
Oh.
No, that is entirely not allowed. Nothing that is shackling you to just things, right? Just things in general, and even sentimental things. You ask oh, somebody gave this to me as a gift, but I'm only keeping it because they gave it to me as a gift. I don't actually like it.
Yeah.
Those kinds of things that it's just just move them on.
I've been hanging on to a T-shirt that the T-shirt I was wearing the day my first son was born.
Nice.
It's been sitting in my drawer for years. I don't like it as a shirt anymore. I'll never wear it again, but I cannot bring myself to get rid of that T-shirt.
Here's a
Immense
trick.
sentimental value.
But it does bring me joy for it to be there, because I look at it and I think about that day. So is that okay?
Let me tell you a little secret here. So if you didn't know this, there is a thing called a T-shirt quilt.
Yes, I've heard of
that,
this.
right?
Yes.
So what I've been doing is all of my sentimental shirts, I am cutting out the memorable section, and I'm saving all of that. so that later on I can have just like a blanket of all of these memories.
That's pretty cool.
Right? Blanket of memories.
Yeah, that is cool.
Yeah.
So that's what I did, and all weekend it was great. I mean, it was just recovering and sleeping.
And preparing, because we're at Worlds now.
Yes, we're at Worlds.
And so that means that you knew you're about to go crazy in both the...
So I was preparing body and mind. I was sitting in my
centering
temple.
Yourself, doing all that. Well, for me, actually, I didn't decide. I had the opportunity to go on a trip to Portland because Tim, my brother, got married.
Congratulations, Tim.
Yeah,
Tim
absolutely.
Got married. Congrats to Tim.
Most people watching and or listening probably know who Tim is or have seen them on various videos. So
yeah, so they got married.
He's a real person.
He still exists. Anyways, got married in front of a waterfall in Portland, so that was cool. They were both very happy, and that was cool to see. But it was really wild because I had to pack for that trip, which included Pacific Northwest weather and a wedding. So like a suit and all that stuff. And also flew straight from there to here, to Worlds, to do the whole Worlds experience. So I had to pack all my stuff for the videos and all my cards for Destiny and all my ships for X-Wing. And it was kind of preparing to leave for 12 days is never like...
We kind of did the exact opposite, I guess, in a sense.
Yeah, so you're centered and I'm still just not
sure
what's
You took all
happening.
of your clothes with you and I got all of mine out.
Yeah, but, anyways, that's what I've been up to. What about you?
Last week, it's just been the usual routine, just working, going home. I played Nier Automata this past week.
What was that?
Nier Automata.
Nier Automata.
Yeah, it's a video game.
Oh.
Yeah. It's pretty awesome. It's really
People
great.
still play
it? I've heard it's awesome.
I just finished the first playthrough of it's a game you play through multiple times. I finished the first playthrough last night. That game does some really cool things, asks some really cool questions in the narrative.
Wow.
I really enjoyed it a lot of all the games I've played recently.
And you're a pretty big fan of video games, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And was that as a child, was that kind of your first glimpse into gaming? Was it through the video game format? Because we were talking earlier about how...
well, maybe. There's a girl who was the daughter of my mom's friend when I was like 6 years old. It's a very hazy memory, and she was kind of my first introduction to gaming in general. And she had an Atari 2600, and I remember playing Adventure. The video game Adventure over at her place. It's the one with the dragons that look like ducks.
Nice.
And just kind of like a block, going around stabbing with this little, couple pixel wide sword. So she had that game. That was really cool. And she also had Dungeons and Dragons, and that was my first introduction to that. So it was kind of simultaneous. But I used to go to the bowling alley with my parents during their league days or nights.
D&D in the back?
No, I play Centipede and back when you had to play most video games in arcades and
that's awesome. I missed that phase really. My dad talks about that a lot. Where
it was awesome.
He used to go spend all the time in the arcade, and it's there's an appeal to that for sure.
Yeah. A lot of fun playing Centipede and Defender, and it's cool. Trackball, it's sweet.
Whatever the games are.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, we're gonna dive in.
All right.
Talk about what's next for Tabletop, and a lot of the topics we've done so far.
We won't actually answer them.
We aren't going to actually answer it. So if that's what you actually wanted, go elsewhere. No, but it's anytime you're trying to answer a question, rarely is the best place to start in answering that question the question itself, which is literally what's next for Tabletop. So I want to get your guys' subjective opinion on this, which is ultimately how Tabletop has evolved to where it's at now. Because I got introduced to Tabletop really when I was 10 by Pokemon TCG in the mid-90s. Technically, when I was a little younger, I played Candyland and Monopoly and Pick Up Sticks and Texas Hold'em, poker, and chess and that kind of game. But to me, the real evolution that happened that created Tabletop as I know it was Magic the Gathering, Pokemon. In the mid-90s, kind of sparked this whole new generation of Tabletop, right? And then
there were so many collectible card games in the 90s. Everything was a collectible card game.
If it was a popular movie, it had a collectible card game.
Right.
And so that era of the 90s was an important phase, I think, of Tabletop. And then you move to the 2000s, where the board game kind of renaissance starts, or the golden era begins to...
Do we have Settlers to blame? Not to
Settlers
blame.
It's a... Yeah.
They're kind of kicking that off.
Catan was instrumental in
taking
board games from the Monopoly era and sorry to...
The fun era?
No, I wouldn't say it. Well, it just... I've had fun playing Monopoly before.
I have too, actually.
Once.
Yeah.
But it just evolved, right? It started showing you that board games could be more than what... I mean, when I first played Catan, it was a big deal. My dad got really into it. I got into it. There was one summer where we played it almost every night, for like multiple times. And then at some point, though, I think the replayability of Catan wears out. And you're just like, all right, I got it. Sort of like with Monopoly or poker with me for a certain point. Like, you eventually get it. But that started happening. And then I think in the past 10 years, there's kind of been another shift. The board games have kind of matured into what they are. LCG started existing, living card games, collectible games. I think you still have Magic, you still have Pokemon, which is crazy to me. Like, that's still around.
How long that's been going on?
So before we really start diving into where Tabletop is now or what's happening next with Tabletop, I would love to hear from you guys and how you see like the important moments in Tabletop that have led us to kind of where we're at, if you have any insights into that.
Yeah, well, so Catan was big, of course. I think also you had, like, the thing that's fascinating to me is, the past, 5 years, I can talk to a person, just a random person in my life, that has a decent shot at knowing what a Euro game is, right?
If you say the words Euro game, they understand it.
Say the word Euro game, and it's like, that's... So now we're even at a point where the categorization within, it used to be that you have board games, right? And so now people are starting to understand even more that, and myself included, when I came into the space, there was just board games, and I was so not interested in that kind of a format. I thought it was long, and it was just a bunch of people arguing about rules and trying to figure out how to move around the board. But it has now gotten to where there's just all these different classifications. People understand different styles of game. Understand a game like Dixit, how that is different from a game like Splendor and these kinds of things. So even I've heard about at work, like at a call center, one of our players works at, like they play Splendor almost every day at the lunch break, right?
Yeah.
So it is starting to seep in, and I guess the history for me has been very similar to yours, right? Because that's essentially the origin story of what we're doing here is two of us growing up together and playing these games. But I got into it a little earlier, so I got into Dungeons & Dragons when I was 6 or 7 with Jonathan and my dad, and that was a completely awesome and wholesome experience. But even on that front, I think it actually tells a great story about the entire industry, because look at where role-playing games have gone.
Sure.
So you had role-playing games start out, and we went through the 90s where Dungeons & Dragons was literally like selling your soul to the devil kind of a thing.
It's more the 80s too.
It was in the 80s as well?
Yeah, it was
absolutely.
Definitely. That's where it was really born.
Was that really where it came from? Because I didn't
Yeah.
think it came around until I was involved in like the late 90s.
Well, you were probably in on like 2nd edition.
Yeah, well, we had the box. We had there's a black box with a red dragon on it. That's all that I remember. But it could have been old too.
I was kept from even seeing the box.
But so that was in the 80s? Was that when all like the
Yeah.
2020 and the Dateline episodes and things, and it was like, your kids
it was like
are
late
being-
80s.
Yeah, it was definitely in the 80s. I mean, they had a made-for-TV movie about like some guy who got too big into D&D and ended up like killing people, or I don't know.
Yeah.
It was
Like
just like
lightning
scare
them.
tactic stuff.
Yeah.
It was the
it
same
was
time
like-
when like heavy metal was like, oh my gosh, heavy metal. And Gerardo Rivera had a big like special about how evil heavy metal music was, and had like Ozzy. You can look it up. There's a great
Welcome
interview.
to the modern world.
There's a great interview with Ozzy Osbourne on that special, where like he essentially calls in, is on a big screen. He's totally confused. He has no idea what's going on. But it's a pretty awesome. It'll give you
worth your time?
give you great insight into like the mentality of the media at the time towards metal, and that kind of that same mentality I think they applied to D&D. It's just something they just didn't understand.
Nice, good to know. But we had the role playing thing all the way grow up from D&D, and then you start to see these different systems, GURPS, and these other kinds of things. So you see some diversification, and now you've kind of gotten out of the role playing is weird and really like archaic kind of a thing. Like it's really underground, and you have people like role playing all the time. Like people that have never been involved in the hobby industry getting together to play a role-playing game. Even something like Dungeons and Dragons, like 5th edition, actually has been played a lot. I think it's 5th or 4th, one of them, being played a lot in these circles. And that's really cool to see. And now you have systems like Burning Wheel and Fiasco and all these now pulling this being very abstract, and it's more of almost like an improv kind of acting kind of situation. You don't even need the dice as much anymore.
And it kind of feels to me with RPGs like, I feel like each segment of tabletop has kind of undergone different revolutions, where you have typically a game that comes along that kind of is the established beginning standard, like D&D, right?
Yeah.
And then in board games, for me, it's like you have the Monopoly and the Sorry and the Life and those kind of games. And then all of a sudden, games like Catan come along and say, hey, this can actually be significantly different than you even the people that have already been into this have been doing it. So D&D, a great example to me is every RPG that has come out since then, continuing to showcase all sorts of like there's one, what was it, Microscope? I think?
Microscope, yeah.
I played that and it's just like, this is just like absurd.
It's pretty meta. Yeah.
It is absurdly different than D&D, but it is very much still an RPG. Even, I know you guys were talking about this on the way to Worlds a little bit, which was Resistance, where, asking the question,
is that a role-playing game?
Is that a role-playing game? Because you get a card that tells you you're either on
a role.
You get a role, and then you play to that role ultimately. Like you're arguing as like you're the traitor or you aren't the traitor. Obviously, it doesn't give you like a character to play out necessarily, and there's a little lack there. But like, it kind of starts fitting into that same vein. And so RPGs though go through an arc, and I think tabletop as a whole is a big category. Because I think about, like, if you just hone in on, like, card
miniatures games, too. Think about miniatures games.
Miniatures games. So 40K was in the 80s?
Think about BattleTech and all those. I remember I played BattleTech, like, really early at Mark Young's house. Jonathan will remember that. And it's so funny. You still remember that joke. It's like, hey, I want to do this thing. And he was like, it's in advanced rules. You can't do that in basic rules. But I mean, the amount of bookkeeping and insanity in that game when I started playing was
heat sinks.
Heat sinks, man. Unbelievable. But you could build your own mechs. It was the greatest thing ever. And the building was awesome. And then you get them on the table, and it's fun, but it's like, it's exhausting. You're keeping track of everything, and you're marking everything. And now when I think about a game like Arena Rex, where you're literally just thrown right into the action, and all of a sudden we're fighting, and it's this awesome experience, and there's very little bookkeeping involved. You start to see how this entire industry is kind of refined, right? It's gone from this idea and trying to like make this concept bring a concept into reality, and it did it kind of roughly at first, right? And so now as that kind of Occam's razor being applied over and over and over, what can we cut? What is the real essence here? Because we say that on the podcast all the time. Now it's gotten to these very refined offerings. And so that actually leads me to another question too, which is like, can it continue to be refined? But what's the history of tabletop for you, Andrew? Because you've been around in this space a little bit longer than we have.
My personal history with tabletop,
well,
or
just like
my take on
how do you see their trajectory, starting at the beginning, whatever you would consider the beginning, and like the real hobby space tabletop, which is probably Dungeons and Dragons or Magic or BattleTech. So one of those.
That's what I think. If you can break tabletop into some categories, ultimately there's board games, there's miniature games, there's card games, there's RPGs. Are there any major?
Those are the major ones right there.
Because for me, it's like I think each category has points. Where it's like you have Monopoly. Before Monopoly, I mean, you have chess and checkers that go way back.
Yeah.
But modern day first leaders is like 40K, is like the big miniatures game as we know it.
Yeah.
Magic is the card game that kind of changed the world. RPGs was D&D, and board games to me is the Catan era. There was a handful of games that like Catan that kind of came out around that era. I don't know the exact timeline of those publications, but Catan was the one that I first interacted with.
Yeah, I think Catan's the one that got the most traction with the widest audience for sure.
Yeah, continues to.
So what is the trajectory then from those staple titles to now, as you see it, right? Like have things
question.
Have things just continue to get refined? Has there been any big innovations that have led to, just changes in the space?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think like you were mentioning, like the whole, like you say Occam's razoring it, and kind of like breaking down games, the design of games over time, and they just refine and refine and refine. But I think it's just exposure. You know, those games have been around for so long. It's just a refinement of the process, and more people designing. It's just more people putting effort towards it, and it just improves over time and changes over time and evolves. And I feel like where games have kind of like, games in like the broadest sense, like if you want to go play a crazy like technical game where you're tracking a lot of stuff on sheets, checking things off, and you know, like monitoring every, you know, like limb damage and hand damage, head damage, oh my eye. If you want those games, they're totally out there. There's room for everything, from those crazy things to like the simplest games. But I think the bulk of the stuff in the middle, I think what we're seeing is that it's like the mechanics have gotten to a point where it's all about enjoying the play experience the most and just getting the most out of when you bring it to the table, you have the most fun. And oftentimes that's by simplifying. So I think it's just been kind of like a natural progression. And I feel that the palette of gamers now is just, it's extraordinarily different than, you know, what it was, you know, 30, 40 years ago. So I think what people are willing to tolerate as far as like the number of rules and complexity and the cumbersome nature of some of those older games, they're not quite into it as much now as they used to be. And you know, kind of what we were talking about before, you know, games have a generally wider audience, and I think, like I said, there's still an audience for that super crunchy game with all that minutia. That's probably about the same size as it used to be.
As it was in 80s or 90s.
Yeah. But now it's, you know, it just games appeal to so many more. Games always appeal to people. Like, I rarely run into an occasion where like you say to somebody who's not a gamer, "Hey, do you want to play a game?" They're like, "No,
no, I'm not into fun."
Yeah, I hate fun.
Yeah.
You know, everyone's, I think, willing to play games for the most part. At least in my experience, I'm sure there are people out there who are just like, you know, the guy at a party who just, you know, refuses to dance. Like, I'm sure that exists. The guy who's just like crosses his arms, shakes his head at the people playing the game, and just doesn't want to have fun. That's fine. But there are, I think, more people are just, you know, willing to have a good time, and I think people are more willing to ask those people because there's not as much of a stigma, I think, associated with board games. So you just ask your non-gamer friends to play, they play, and then they get hooked on the simpler, faster, you know, games that are just lighter, easier to play at the table. And then, you know, some of those people also then move on to other games, and some never do. But yeah, I think there's just a lot more exposure, I think, in general.
I think part of that too is not. So there's a lot of elements to this for me, which is, I think exposure is very important. But I think alongside the timing of all this in tabletop, something that culturally has shifted is, I know when I was a kid, like in the mid-90s, it was like just the mentality around things like Lord of the Rings or Star Wars or Pokemon or any of these universes, right? Because there's Dungeons and Dragons, which is its own entity, and there's Warhammer 40K, right? But the moment you're like, hey, I have this Star Wars game, inherently the exposure now is way easier, because like you not only have almost a more normalization of these themes that are possible, but then if you apply that to tabletop games, it makes it a lot easier to introduce it to people. And it's like, I know plenty of people that watch Star Wars or watch superhero movies. So you have something like Legendary, the deck building game, and it's like, I don't know.
This is approachable now.
This is super approachable, not only because
point.
of the mechanics, but now because the theme is more approachable in general to a mass audience. And the games have evolved to a certain point, and the mentality around it has evolved. Like, there's a lot of things that had to happen, I think, for tabletop to evolve in the way that it has. And it reminds me of, in school, I went to school for business, and they always talk about like the bell curve of basically people that buy products. And it's like you have the early adopters, which is the first derivative, and it's like then you have the followers who follow those people, and then you have the vast majority in the middle, and then you have laggers, basically. Like the people buying iPhones for the first time now are those people. But yeah, like when the iPhone comes out, right? It provides a really good example.
Just like, ooh.
Maybe you.
It is.
It is.
It is.
And it's different for every category, but like ultimately, something like the iPhone, right? It first came out, it was like $500 for a phone. There's no app store. It's just a touchscreen phone made by Apple, which had its own stigma and everything. But the people that were in line for the first iPhone overnight for the first time, they're that small, tiny group up front. And I think that is what tabletop was in the early 90s. People that were into D&D, the people that were playing Magic when it first came out, the people that were doing these things are the people who, in this particular category, were ready and willing to like jump on it and like go through the...
They saw that it would be worth it.
Yeah,
that it was something here that's magical, like that's important.
Yeah, and it's like we don't know all the answers to the rules questions for this D&D book that's hundreds of pages long, or to Magic when we don't have an FAQ document and like here's how collectible games work and here's how you collect and here's the smart thing. They're willing to dive in, right? And so then to me, like I'm thinking about that curve. I think the 2000s was the second piece of that curve. Which is, we have an established thing now that is kind of approachable and understandable.
Game shops start popping up.
There's game shops. There's just all this kind of momentum that's going, and a lot of factors have to happen for this to work correctly, for a market to exist. Then the third step is that next step that I think is taken, which is you have established the first movers are doing it. The people that follow the first movers are doing it, and this is the like you're either going to get over the curve or you're not, which is just this idea of like, that's the phase I think we're in right now. And I think we're closing off that phase. And I personally think that tabletop is about to cross that peak and be able to reach and appeal to an extremely vast audience because of the timing of the rules evolving, the game companies evolving, the people selling the games in local stores across the world or online or anywhere. The way they're doing it is just much more approachable. Things like YouTube did not exist 12 years ago. So you couldn't be like, well, how do you play Catan?
Even online communities of any kind, right? Because it was such these disparate groups of people that couldn't really talk to each other, all of a sudden had an outlet now where we can all talk about Dungeons & Dragons together on RPG.net or whatever it is. Which I did visit a lot back in the day. Rebel Basers for Star Wars, the trading card game. And at the same time, something that you said really struck me, which was talking about the middle of the board games. You have the chunky ones, the light ones, and then you have the middle, which is just all about fun. The thing about those early games is I don't think those were designed with fun necessarily in mind. I think they were,
I don't know.
I think you come into BattleTech though, and you say, how can I recreate mechs fighting?
Right.
Right, but, and it's just how do we do this technically?
And I think for people though that want to do that,
that
is fun.
Oh,
exactly.
absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
The simulationist nature of it is the fun.
That's true. That's true.
That's where like I think one of the best examples of the razor being applied to me is X-Wing, and it is for a lot of reasons, which is it's a miniatures game that is pre-painted, pre-put together models, so it's cutting out that factor of it. It's Star Wars. The way the rules are built are highly approachable and make you, and I think this is the question you have to ask, right? Which is, does it feel like I'm flying ships around in a squad? And the answer is yes. Could it be more accurate to fly in a ship? Yeah. Absolutely, right? Yeah. I'm never worried about how much
track
fuel,
your yaw.
Track your fuel in your yaw.
How much fuel I've got left. What degree I'm pointing at towards the far sun that is provided.
And that's my example about BattleTech, right?
Yeah,
like
that's what I was getting at.
That's a piece of that experience is you're trying to simulate that, which for some people is fun, but you're not going in and asking, how can we make this just the most, and I guess it's just for the most amount of people, the most enjoyable experience, like really honing in on what is it that makes this fun, the idea of mechs fighting, what is it that makes that fun, and then you cut away all the rest. But that was the thing, it had to start somewhere, right? It had to start with it, and even early D&D, how can we recreate the epicness of random encounters with monsters, right? And so you get all these tables and whatnot.
And I think going back to my analogy earlier with the bell curve, it's like that's how it has to start. Where it's like if you look at early technology, it's always awful, right? Like my good friend Matt Phillips, he is the classic first mover.
Yeah.
He wants to have the new crazy thing before anyone else has it, right? So he's willing to buy VR when it's buggy. He's willing to buy the setup when it's not quite right.
Yeah.
Because he wants to be on the cutting edge and the first one to experience it, right? But if I had to do things he had to do to set up his VR, never.
Yeah.
Never. It's like
you got to go to the menu settings.
I mean, he has to set it up, and you have the triangulation of the stuff, and it's like this little thing is like, oh, I got to redo the drivers, and I got to replace this, and I'm just like, no way.
Say what?
I'm gonna buy VR when it's like easy.
Yeah.
When it's easy mode, and it's just like there's different people, and one of the questions I guess is it a concern that because on the curve, going back to the curve for a second, it's to appeal to the entire curve. Mm-hmm. You have to. My mind is going crazy here, but you have to offer a range. I think going to the analogy of the chunkier and the like super streamlined, and the ones that are just focused on fun, is this idea that like when you just have the chunky, your audience is going to be tiny, but you're going to get those first mover cats effectively. Yeah. But if you also just have the like super simple, like because I think we actually did, which is you had the chunkier games when they first came out, and then you had checkers, and chess, and you had 52 card deck of cards,
which are technically very simple games, right?
Which inherently are Candyland. It's like this very simple game.
Checkers way better than Candyland.
Yes, it is. It is a way better game, right? And it's as simple as it gets. But at the same time, checkers doesn't simulate anything really. Same with chess, right?
Yeah,
like
not really. I can't even imagine what it would be simulating.
And so, anyways, I think what we are seeing now is that there were enough. It needs time to grow.
Yeah.
It needs time to grow in a way that can support the creation of all of these games. And it's almost a self-fulfilling prophecy where like the more people that get into the industry, the more companies that can exist because there's more people buying the product, which means the more investment that can go into it to making good products. And like you just keep stepping and stepping and stepping. And so we've stepped quite a ways. And that's, I think we're all kind of, there's this forward momentum for tabletop. And that's why we want to even ask the question about what is coming for tabletop. So what do you guys see as coming for tabletop? Like what is in the future if we've kind of evolved to this point where there's more access than ever, more understanding of what tabletop games are? I remember 5 or 6 years ago, it's like, what do you do? It's like, oh Lord.
Dude,
like,
I used to say like graphic design, web design, marketing.
It was a nightmare. Even now, it's like trying to explain what we do in particular. It's like you can at least say we make games.
Yeah, and you can just say
It's challenging though. I mean, it's like talk about what you do. So you're a retailer? No.
That's
make video
funny.
Games? No.
Because every time I say what we do, it's like, so you guys make games, and it's like, no, you just sell games.
That's funny that's a thing. There's still a number of people that can't understand what running a board game studio or a game studio would entail.
Yeah.
Huh. Interesting.
It is.
Well, we've got a ways to go then, don't we?
Yeah, we have ways.
Yeah,
so
definitely.
So what do you guys see on the horizon for our beloved tabletop game industry?
Yeah. What's the next couple of years, man? Like.
Well, I think that things are just going to kind of continue as they have. Like I feel that, like I was saying, I feel like there's more and more exposure to the types, to more interesting types of games than the classic board games. More major retailers are carrying more interesting games, and I think that's really helped a lot. And I think that places to go and play those games that are not your house, nice places to go and play those games, like your guys' store, like our game center,
nice. Thanks.
that are inviting, clean, friendly staff. Like you can get food or drink there and just like kind of just hang out and make it a day, make it an experience, and bring your family. Having places like that, I think, is really important, and there's more and more of those places where you can go. And I think that like board game cafes are becoming a bigger thing all around the country. I don't know how many of them there are in other countries, but I think having those places where you can go out and you can have an event, go out and have fun with your family and bring them to play games with you is huge, because those kids who are exposed to it are just gonna grow up with it, feeling like it's just like, this is the thing we do. This is cool. This is fun.
Sure.
And I feel like that idea of kids over the past 30 years growing up with games, like growing up with games in a way that we really haven't prior, has really kind of primed us to be in this position where people are more accepting of games and just more interested in playing them without it being a big deal. So I don't think I guess I don't really necessarily feel like there's anything like, major and crazy that's going to happen in the next couple of years. I kind of feel like that already happened.
Yeah.
And like maybe we are in that last little bit of the beginning of the bell curve to some bigger explosion. But yeah, I think in order for that to happen, I think we just need to get more of our stuff out there, right?
Yeah.
And have it visible to more people, and that's really the only thing really standing in the way.
That's pretty encouraging too, right? If the idea, and this is how most industries develop, right? You think about like automobiles, for instance, right? You have like that spark of the first. It's like, whoa, but I mean, past that, imagine the innovation over time that it has taken to get us to here. Not a lot of like, oh my goodness, look at this incredible new automobile concept. It's just been like, next year's a little better, next year's a little better, next year's a little better. Mm-hmm. And then sometimes now batteries are involved, or now like ethanol is involved, and a little better, a little better. So it does seem pretty rare that we have a big kind of disruptive meteor to an industry. That seems like a somewhat rare thing. So that's kind of encouraging that the idea is we've kind of almost gotten over that initial hump, and now it's just this giant swirl of innovation, and as that is happening, just more and more people are going to continue to come in and come in and come in. Mm-hmm. And I think I agree that the thing that needs to happen the most is you have to have spaces ready for that moment, right? You have to have the local game store, in whatever form that ultimately takes, mm-hmm. ready to accept all of that attention. Because I do worry that if we get to a point where everybody's interested and it doesn't really go anywhere in the community, there's a limit to visibility where you're just doing something at your house or with a couple of friends, right? And that you continue to do that all across the country. But whenever you can take all of those people in an area, get them together, and now we have things and events, and now people can get drawn into that who would never have done it by themselves mm-hmm. at their own house. So that does seem to me to be the next biggest, most critical thing, is that kind of net waiting to catch all of these incoming people, because I do think it's going to happen. YouTube, media, etc. It's going to be a real thing. Yeah,
well, I think just in the world, like without the internet and like having to find it circuitously that way, I feel that just having something like 'cause our studio is right next to the game center. Yeah. Like right there, I go and get I got this coffee there.
Yeah.
Game center
coffee.
Every day.
Coffee today.
It's awesome. Just having that like right there on a busy street. Mm-hmm. People driving by, seeing that it's essentially packed every day, and when you're driving by, there's giant windows. You can see with the lights on what's going on in there. It looks like people are having fun. Every time you drive by, like if you're not into games or whatever, you're like, the game center, what is that? What are they doing? That looks fun in there. Like, what are they doing?
What is that?
Yeah, and that just plants a seed. And then, maybe one day they'll come in and check it out and have a good time.
Yeah, and I think good analogies for tabletop and what might be coming next for tabletop to me are the car industry mm-hmm. or the coffee industry. I think that's another great example. But with the car industry, right, it's like you have the invention of the car, mm-hmm. then you have some great way of making it better, which is like the assembly line, right? It's like which revolutionizes, and that was revolutionary because before you could only make cars so fast, mm-hmm. not like how fast they can drive, but the literal production speed. So with gaming, you have this like industry level stuff where it's like, how can we effectively produce these games? How can we produce them at a price that is reasonable, at mm-hmm. a scale that is reasonable, and that requires both people, and it's just like this complex mechanism that's in place. But then you also have these moments in cars, right, where you were talking about, you got a newer car recently, and how like it was like a 17-year update,
right?
And you're talking about a lot's happened with cars.
Yeah.
But if you look at it on like a zoomed out level, it's like not that much has happened to cars.
Right. Combustion engines, man.
Like, really, not that much has
Right.
happened.
Right.
It's not flying cars yet. It's pure electric.
I like that you say yet.
Yeah.
Not flying cars yet.
I
still
believe in it. Or you look at another going back to the phone example, right? It's like, look at the iPhone coming out. It's like, that was like, as soon as I saw it in person, I was just like, oh my
It
goodness.
was pretty distracting. Before that, the Razor was awesome.
And
also.
then the Razor's immediately just garbage.
Done.
But even now, it's like ever since then, really, it's just gone. Ever since then, though.
If you could flip an iPhone, it'd be way better.
I don't know.
Yeah. There you go.
Anyways.
That's that tail end of the bell curve.
Right.
Yeah, the tail end crunchy.
I'm just holding out until you can bend it.
Yeah,
Until then, forget
it's
it.
fine. Anyways, you look at that, and it's like, since then, it's like there were a couple major innovations, though, right? Which was like the HD camera was important. The App Store was critical. Like, there was no App Store originally, which is mind-boggling to me. So you have all these innovations that happen, and those to me feel like D&D or Magic, or it's like people have been playing games forever, and so it's not a matter of games being invented. It's what innovations are happening to make it more accessible, more approachable by people, more like you can produce it more and get it to more people, and just all those factors. So
where do apps play a
well,
role?
I was gonna say I think there's various
Mansions of Madness,
various
Navaro over
parts
here.
of the industry that I want to talk about. What's next, right? Which is like the actual making of games, right? We haven't seen a new category so we have miniatures games, card games, board games, role-playing games,
App integrated board games.
and
Subcategory or category?
Those are subcat.
Or is it?
Yeah.
Or is it? And that's where it's like, I think there will be more categories that get invented, just like card games were invented. It's hard to imagine because it's never a straight line; it's a turn.
Yeah.
And you can't see around the corner. But like, someone's going to invent a new game type. I think it'll happen.
I feel like there's so many games now, and they're so influenced by each other that instead of more game types, it's just
more
going to
convergence?
be. It's going to. Well, I think it's just going to be more subcategories with subtle influences. I mean, you guys were talking about like, is Resistance is that a role playing game because you're playing roles? Probably not, because you could totally play it without playing roles. You could just play it by the rules, and just like play it super straight, stiff, and just like, this is a deduction. This is a deduction game. But the role playing elements can make their way into lots of games. Like, and we have like any heavily themed game, like which I think most of, if not all of our games fall into that category, where you could play a game like Eldritch Horror. You have a character. You don't have to role play that character, but it's a lot more fun when you do.
Yeah.
Same thing with
For you.
Yeah, right, for me. Exactly. But you can those things just kind of seep in. So I feel like instead of there being more categories, I feel like it's just we'll just start borrowing from all little bits. It's kind of like same thing that's kind of happened to video games. It's like, try to pin down some modern video games as to like what category of game does this fall into.
Video game.
Video game, right? It pulls from so many different places. It has so many different bits to try to tie it all up in a nice little package is kind of disservice.
I'm not sure it's possible for another category to exist. I can't think, like, if I tried to come up with one, I got nothing.
Well, we'd be millionaires, I think, if we could
Well,
do it.
yeah, but what I will say is that if we're going to have more game-changing moments in the design of games, that is a moment that could happen. Which is, if you sort of like when Magic happened, no one was like, "Oh, build your own deck and play a game."
Yeah,
Like,
right.
That wasn't a thing you could
Yeah.
even like conceive of. So if you'd asked, Games Workshop in the early '90s, it's like, do you think there are other categories of games out there lurking? They may have easily said, nah. Like, there's board games, there's role-playing games, and there's miniature games.
Right.
Yeah. Let me,
We cannot see the future, Zach. It's true.
Yeah, but I think that if I'm looking for like
Andrew's verified it.
groundbreaking
It
territory,
could be there, technically. I mean, we have to keep our eyes
It
open,
could be
right?
there. I think technology is
Yeah.
a potential player in that.
Okay, so let me give you two examples to kind of start to wrap this topic up as far as actual next steps. Like, we're talking tangible next steps. So app-driven games are definitely a thing that's going to happen and will continue to happen.
Yeah,
Of course,
it's happened.
FFG, really kind of leading the way.
Has
on that
happened.
It has happened.
front. But I want to take it in two other directions. One is technological, which is 3D printing. I think 3D printing is something to absolutely keep an eye on. As far as what happens when you just download schematics.
I think
for a
I
game.
know where the next one is.
Yeah, I just got it. It's so good. I can't wait.
I know what you're gonna say.
Yeah, exactly. It's this direction.
Let's get to it.
what happens when you can 3D print all your components? Or
And they won't break.
And it won't break, and everything works, and the technology has gotten better, and you don't have to manufacture anymore. You don't have to do supply chains. You don't have to do distribution.
I'll let you do some crazy stuff.
You simply sell a $20 schematic, and then they click print on the 3D print, and they have the game, right? What does that allow you to do in terms of development and cost and all of that when you don't have to worry about production, right?
The sky's the limit. I mean, it's essentially video games. Right?
Isn't that
you know? I mean, obviously video games, there's resources involved in making those as well, and there'd be resources involved in creating the schematics for whatever the games you're doing, but there's no
production,
physical
distribution,
thing. Yeah, exactly.
Quality assurance,
and then you have like that whole downloadable content thing where you can send out every couple months a $5, here's a new thing that you can 3D print. So you have that aspect. Then you have the other side, which Jonathan and I are crazy excited about, which is what we're calling folk games. And this really happened when we saw Swords and Strongholds, Luke Crane over Gen Con last year. And this is a designer who has gone really far in one direction, like the far end of RPGs, making very interesting kind of next level innovative kind of things. And then goes and designs his first ever board game, and it feels like something that you play in the Shire, for thousands of years.
Cool.
It feels like something that you have your 4 little mice on this side, 4 little mice on that side, a tiny little grid board, and you have a 3 cards that you're constantly replenishing with 3 actions in the game, right? You can do a sword, you can do a stronghold, or you can do a diplomacy, switch places. That's the whole game. It plays out differently every time because you have random cards. And it's super simple, super easy to understand, and replayable until the end of time, right? And you can imagine just an entire culture that this is the game that they all grew up playing, right? Like, it's incredible. For something like Mancala, for these kinds of old, traditional, rooted games, super simple.
Have you played Tak?
Yes, with the shapes, where you're making the line, trying to make the line across the board. Yeah.
I think that falls in that category.
Exactly. Yeah. That's exactly right. And so I do think that there's also going to be a push to how can we get to the roots, like trying to challenge a designer to strip off all of the trappings of a modern game, and can you take it and make it timeless? Mm-hmm. Can you make it replayable forever? And I think that would be a fascinating step too, and maybe a lot of designers will go in that direction. So those are the 2 categories that I'm interested in: 3D printing and folk
polar
games.
opposites.
Yeah.
So just in summary, so I can make sure we're on the same page here. You think that tabletop will continue evolving at a similar pace and direction that it's been evolving?
Andrew,
technically speaking,
I don't want to pin you down.
I would say
this is your personal opinion.
Yeah, no, I think my honest opinion is that based on what we see right in front of us, like, I think that's a very sensible approach. But I'm not much of a speculator.
Sure.
Yeah.
And we have no idea what the future will hold. So it's
we have some
no, not
you
really.
know what the 2018 schedule for FFG is going to hold, I imagine.
I do
Speaking
know
of
that.
Spoiler alert.
I do know that.
Yeah, I'm just kidding.
I do know that.
I'm not going to ask any questions.
Thank you. But
you just give me a sour look, and it's not worth our time.
You son of a...
What were you gonna say? I'm sorry.
What I was gonna say is, like, I don't like to speculate too much on the future, because you just...
What a bad topic for you to be on the show.
You never know. Well,
I'm just kidding.
It's maybe I'm just here to bring that particular perspective. But yeah, I think the natural evolution of our industry, I think, like, it seems to indicate that we're on the precipice of something, which is awesome. But who knows? Who
And so
knows what'll happen.
keep your eyes open, basically,
Yeah.
and be ready.
And you think that folk games are about to make a big
I think,
or they're going to arrive.
I think that folk games will re-arrive from their place hundreds, if not thousands of years ago, to the present. So kind of a rediscovery. It's not dissimilar, and I hate to actually make the comparison because I fit into so many of these categories, but when you think about I don't even know what we call it anymore. We used to call it the hipster movement, but that's really not correct at all because that's an actual movement like in New York and it was important. But like hipster, scenester, whatever it is.
What a hipster take.
This kind of, I know, it's like...
Spoken like a true hipster.
I've read Wikipedia. It's the kind of...
internet.
It's like why vinyl's making a comeback. It's why, for the love of... cassette tapes are making a comeback.
Nah.
Shut your mouth.
I am serious.
Nah, what do they offer?
Nothing. Except being cassette tapes. Nothing.
Dude, that's
I have a big collection
you're
of cassette
probably
tapes
rich.
in my.
serious.
You're right.
I'm so serious. There's these high-end tape players. There's people in London. So like I'm into
I
electronics.
at least get
they're,
vinyl.
They're putting out mixtapes that are only available via cassette.
That's awesome.
Okay.
Well,
It's awesome. You just said it. That's awesome. That's why they're doing it.
Do I like copy of like Appetite for Destruction?
Here's the thing.
Cassette? I've
Here's
got
the
it.
thing. It's awesome because I love watching the market be the market. And that is not cassettes making a comeback. That is people realizing that low supply can create insane demand.
Dude, I mean
that's why vinyl's cool because there's limited press. It's one of the reasons vinyl's cool because there's limited press.
It's certainly one reaction to music sharing digitally, right?
Sure,
you can only get it in a physical medium.
Which is
How about
cool
that?
in like
right?
a 1990s hip hop kind of way. Which is why it's cool. I grew up in the 90s, right? But at the same, it's like you burn the CDs for your friends, and it's like, here's your thing. Or
Yeah,
like you have.
it's fun.
But
fun.
I also think that humans are getting back in touch with the tangible reality, right? Because we've just been screened out since I was a kid, right? We started that phase of just like, nothing is real. It's all just intangible, ethereal stuff that I'm watching or interacting with on a keyboard. And it's like, no, it feels really good to hold a record and like have an object and a physical thing that has value and that has art and
Like
that
play a board game.
Yeah.
Right.
Or a board game, and
anime.
continue to go, a folk game. So yes, I do believe that the rediscovery of kind of the traditional game is important, and I really think that 3D printing in the next decade is going to change the game.
Yeah, have you read The Diamond Age by Neil Stephenson?
No, I have not.
I read that recently.
Jonathan has.
It's great. It's really good.
Can you give me the cliff notes?
No. But
All right, well, go read it.
But you should read it. Okay. Everything's printed in the future, essentially, with little nanomachines. Nanomachines everywhere printing things for you. Like you have this little machine in your house, push a button, like I want a mattress. Push the button for the mattress, it comes out, you unfold it.
That'd be handy.
There it is. Yeah, it'd be crazy.
All right.
Yeah.
What would that
so there you
do?
go.
Wow, yeah.
So if you like this future of printing things and having it delivered immediately to you via schematic, you definitely enjoy that.
Okay.
that novel.
Fascinating.
I'll check it out.
Well, I think in general, we can all agree that tabletop has come a long way, and it does definitely feel like, for one reason or another, tabletop is on the precipice or the eve of continued just massive expansion and growth. I know I've witnessed over the past decade or so massive growth in the entire industry, which has been cool to watch. And I think for me, even when I'm talking about the potential for new categories of games, which I actually think will happen, we'll see. I'll bring you back on when that happen.
Sure.
It's like, hey, remember this clip?
Yeah.
Anyways, and I think all of that is possible, even 3D printing or folk games or whatever will exist. The total revolution I'm excited about in like the spaces, retail spaces for people to play, the way people produce these games. And the business side, the manufacturing, the production, whether it's 3D printing or whatever, will be made possible in the self-fulfilling prophecy way of more people being exposed to it, getting into it, means that there is more of an industry to be built around, you can invest more in the research and development of whether it's technology in the form of 3D printing or integrated games or the space itself. And so I think there will be, over the next 10, 15 years, dramatic change. Not in like a space age floating game store kind of way, but in a way that you can't even really approach because I got him on that one. Just pictured him floating.
Of all the things, like the first thing to float is the game store. Can't do cars, can't do anything. But the game store can definitely get there.
Oh man, I'm glad that humor hit home. But that is where
Something's coming. I mean, it's going to
there's
continue
a lot. It's
to...
going to be exciting, and I think in ways that it may not be as exciting as a floating game store, but in the same way that like even the kind of change that exists when you introduce the assembly line to making cars, where it's not even about like the car doing something spectacularly better, but now millions of more people can be driving cars, and then because all those cars happen, roads get built, so now the tires adjust and the engines adjust and the gas. Even now, it's the problem with adapting to electricity is that like the infrastructure is not built for electricity.
Yeah. That's what I worry about with the game store. The infrastructure
is
being
not
there
built for the modern era, and I think that's where there's a healthy pace to evolve. If it actually happened faster, it would have probably been a problem, in my opinion. So, but it's exciting. It's exciting to be involved in tabletop when all of this potential is going to happen. I think we can all agree to that.
Absolutely.
Eyes open.
All right, well, it is time for the best time of the week. Question time.
All right.
This time, before we dive into questions, a couple things. First, you can obviously use hashtag AskCovenant on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, the old hashtag, and we will answer the questions here. That's what we're doing. Andrew's going to help us answer some today. But before we dive into this week's questions,
let's talk about some answers.
Let's talk about some answers from last week, which is what we're going to start doing. Last week we talked about can you have fun playing any game, and we asked you what makes a game the most fun. And we got a couple cool responses. So Alan Jones on YouTube said, the thing I enjoy the most from a game is the struggle. By that I mean knowing that I gave my all to a game, win or lose, my opponent did the same. When a game is a struggle of two people trying to win and not one-sided, I feel happy and accomplished regardless of the result.
That's pretty fascinating, right? That's the tried and true just competitive game idea right there.
I feel like Alan is a Thrones player.
Two people just trying their best, right, to do it. And that's interesting that it's fun regardless of the result. That if you know you gave it your all, you can be proud of that regardless of the outcome. And that's a really pretty mature take on a competitive game.
And too, like thinking about games where you just slaughter someone.
It's like not that fun.
It's really not that exciting.
Unless
for me,
it's certain people. Like you, for instance, is
or
always really fun.
I'm going to not name names. All right, the second answer we really liked was from Melik on YouTube, and he said, for me, it's the human element that makes anything fun, especially games. I have a great set of friends and a brother who are willing to try out any game, and 9 times out of 10, it's going to be fun. If the game is mechanically bad, we finish the game session with laughs and sometimes create house rules to try to make it more fun. Yeah. Which is cool. I actually like that when it's like, hey, this game is awful.
Yeah.
And like we accept that it's not that well designed of a game, but we're going to make some adjustments to make it fun. So
that's right. And that no matter what, if the human element is involved, like that's the source of the fun.
Yeah, he clearly has a good group of friends to play games with.
Yeah. That's probably the most important part for me. Like the people that you play with is what makes it real fun. All right, well, remember, #AskCovenant. We'll answer your questions. This week's questions. First up, in some scribbly notes from Steven.
It's asked by a lot of people, so we didn't have an actual name.
Asked by a lot of people, and since we had Andrew on, who is the head of the Fantasy Flight Game Studio, we want to ask some policy questions.
Visitation,
employee
time off.
Yeah, as I find myself writing more and more policy these days. But that said, I'd like to know a little bit more about your dress code policy and your actual question, which is 3 core set policy. We see this a lot in games. I think I have a reason for why it exists, but you're here.
So let me give you the.
I'm not aware of this policy.
I'll give you the antagonistic.
It's not in writing somewhere.
No.
Take. So people would say, why is FFG? It's reasonable. Why is FFG forcing me or making me buy 3 of the core set?
Just forcing them to do it.
To get the entire gaming experience. And like I understand the counterpoint of, well, you don't have to do it. But basically the argument of, can you not cut out some cards, add enough quantity where I only need 1 of this core set? Because if I want to actually play this game like in a serious way, I have to buy 3 of this one item and I get a lot of dupes that I don't need and this kind of a thing. So what's the give and take on 3 core sets and how you build a core set?
Well, when we approach a core set, what we're really trying to do is make the core set itself a game in and of itself that is the best experience it could be and presents the game in the best light. Because there's definitely a big category of card game player who will say, like, well, I need everything so I can customize my decks. So those people are going to be like, they're going to be probably, potentially irritated that they're like, oh, I have to go out and buy 3 core sets. But there's not an insignificant segment of players who will buy a core set. And
like a board game.
Like a board game, exactly. And that really can't, that customer can't really be discounted. And I feel like if someone's like, say you just want to like try out an LCG for the first time, and you get a core set that has a very limited scope and experience of experience, which it would have to be for us to be able to provide it at the cost we do for like an LCG. If they play it for the first time and they don't have a good experience with it, they're not going to get into the game. They might dismiss the category entirely, and not just the game itself. So we feel it's important for someone who's coming to it for the first time to have a great time with that core set, and to experience as much as we can put of that game into that experience for them. So that's really our thinking on the core sets, is that we just want that one copy to be really, really, really great.
Very cool. All right, next up we have John on Twitter. He wants to know, what IP, world, or theme would you like to see explored in the next LCG?
Oh wow, that's a loaded question for Andrew. Man, oh man.
I gotta think of a good
fish
answer.
in there.
I didn't pick this at all. It just happened. We didn't know if it was going to be you or someone else.
Is there another LCG?
Is there?
I
wasn't asking
I haven't
that.
heard of anything.
No, I was just
There's
saying.
this awesome one that's coming out called Legend of the Five Rings.
You as
So
a
I'm
person,
really excited.
what world would you like to see a game based on? Even not even an LCG, but like, it doesn't have to be LCG. I'm not trying to fish at all. Who gave me this question?
Tell me what. I'll start with mine actually, and I'm gonna do this because of Robert and not being here, but it's absolutely Dune. Having some kind of a Dune game would be mind-blowing, I know, for a lot of people who are deeply into that. And certainly the current LCG audience, I think a lot of them would have crossover into that Dune fan base. So
Would that be cooperative, you think?
I don't know, man. I don't know anything about Dune. I'm sorry, I really don't. But I've learned about the universe. I know about the Bene Gesserit thing.
Yeah.
I know about some of that stuff, and I think
Arrakis,
it would be
sandworms,
fascinating.
spice.
The spice
must
flow. That's all that I know.
For me, that way you have a little more time to carefully produce your answer.
Or not answer at all.
Or not answer at all. It's fine. I would actually like to see, and I know there's licensing things going on and whatnot, and so it's probably unlikely, but I would very much like to see a superhero LCG at some point.
Oh yeah.
Because it's been I think Upper Deck has a license for Marvel and all that entails, and they've been making the deck building, which is fine. It hasn't really ever been my cup of tea, but
Some kind of a solid
Did you like Versus?
superhero?
it's fine. No, I actually enjoyed Versus when I played it, and then when I started approaching it in like a serious manner, I didn't enjoy that side of Versus.
Right.
Cool.
But whether it's a superhero in game in general, it's like I would love to see like an Imperial Assault style superhero thing too. That'd be painting up a hero.
I mean, I would love to see it, even if it has nothing to do with the established DC, Marvel.
Oh, that's
anything.
really fine, yeah.
Just
like
like
hero
anything
game.
with hero, like superhero stuff.
But I do picture
you
like
create your own superhero. That's the most fun thing in the world to do.
Absolutely.
Create your own superhero. My
But
God.
that's why like if I was doing heroes, it would be like I can picture it in similar systems to what already exists, right? Whether it's Imperial Assault or like a Destiny. It's like picking your 2 or 3
Oh, it's
heroes
too
with the
easy.
dice. It's like
It's too
get out
easy.
here. Anyways, I would enjoy seeing that. No, nothing here. But you
got a genre even? Just like any.
I don't think I can weigh in on this just because of the.
He's out.
I can't. I don't know.
let me
It's
answer-
just
let me-
it's too dangerous. The waters are too dangerous for me to wade in.
I want to
What's your
answer.
favorite
I want to
IP?
answer for you. I want to answer for you. I know exactly. Here's what you should do: a heavy metal game of some kind, where you're like playing band members and having to put together like songs and stuff.
Yeah.
I've thought about that for a while, and I think it would be awesome.
That could be cool.
Right?
That could be cool.
Somebody was telling me about a
That's
role
the
playing
classic
game.
line. That would be cool. Wouldn't
That
it?
would be cool.
If you do a heavy metal LCG, I'm going to die. That'd be hilarious.
Just sniped it.
Would you guys ever play Brutal Legend? Tim Schafer's video game.
No, but I know
Double
Tim
Fine.
Schafer.
Yeah.
Not that Tim Schafer. Tim Schafer.
Brutal Legend.
Brutal
What was
Legend.
that?
So that is a heavy metal open world video game featuring Jack Black.
Oh wow.
Yeah, it's great if for no other reason that it adheres to its vision. It's fantastic.
It's exactly what you think it's going to be.
Exactly. Yeah.
Perfect.
It didn't do very well.
Very, very niche audience for that one, I think. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Open world heavy metal is not exactly
I enjoyed
everyone's cup of
Open
tea.
world heavy metal.
Open world heavy metal real-time strategy game.
It's
that's
definitely,
awesome.
Yeah, it's
definitely
something.
has to be the most successful game of all time.
Right.
Thank you guys all so much for watching. Remember, use hashtag AskCovenant, and we will answer your questions right here on the show. You leave this in the comments, which is, it says what makes a game fun for you,
Here's what you
which
do.
is wrong. But what I want to know, leave in the comments. We'll pick a couple to read off next time and talk about, which is, what do you think is next for Tabletop? We'll catch you guys on the next episode. Until then, keep playing.